be very interested to see your perception or perspective on like what influence does music have in your life, and specifically, do you see a connection to your work in artificial intelligence and how it lets you perceive artificial intelligence?
Oh, very definitely. What the thing about intelligence, human intelligence, is that language and music are basically the only things that we humans do better than other species, right? I mean, we don't run faster, we don't fly, not very good at climbing trees anymore. We're not stronger, we don't see more sharply, we don't smell more sharply. We're pretty lame as a species, except for our unique abilities in language and music. And the thing is that you know, really, music was the foundation of a lot of human language abilities. Our ancestors were singing before they were talking, and uh, early speech probably evolved from uh, using our song abilities to be able to represent ideas about the world. And once we evolved stronger linguistic abilities, then we turned around and we applied those to music. And so we've been developing more sophisticated types of music using musical languages. So this has like co-evolved through a million years, and it leaves us with brains that are supremely evolved for music and language, and those fundamental building blocks underneath it is how we implement intelligence, and therefore studying music is heavily related to studying language. It's just, the same areas of the brain that are used, except that music is activating many of them in parallel. It's like exercising those linguistic abilities on steroids. And the kind of creativity, the kind of improvisation and expression in traditional music teaches us a lot about how the mind creates, how not just how does the mind interpret new things that it's never experienced before, but also how it learns and then is able to generalize so that it can take what it's learned previously, but then express new things in real time. Um, Not in the sense of this, very recent aspect of music, especially Western European symphonic tradition, where somebody writes out a complex score, and then you have trained musicians that just do nothing but they read and execute that score. Um, that's actually a very artificial recent form of music that only happened in the last few hundred years. Traditionally, music is improvisational, and it has conventions, but it's not the same twice in a row. And you have a conversation between the musicians who are typically sitting there bouncing off of each other, just like you and I are talking. Um, that tells us a lot about how the brain works, about what kinds of facilities there are with which to learn and to express and to create.
Okay. And um, I had the thought now while you were talking, and maybe it's far off, but do you think that artificial intelligence, the way it has been created the last couple of decades up to the time where you will know better than me when the point was, if it's at all the case, deep learning was introduced, that there was maybe a switch when you compare it to music, to the Western type of music, the artificial intelligence before, and got in has somehow through the work of certain people, including you, somehow to this more linguistic, improvised, creative type of approach how to program artificial intelligence?
Um,
Was there such a change at all when you look at deep learning, for example, or other stages in the development of artificial intelligence?
yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think the major change was what I was referring to earlier when we moved from rule-based, logic-based systems that were coded by hand, so that all the knowledge of the system was written by humans rather than learned by the machine.
Yes, I know, I
And
know.
then subsequently the machine learning models. Um, the in terms of the deep learning models, they're one family of machine learning models, and to be honest, I started playing with what we now call deep learning in the late 1980s, early 1990s. In fact, my postdoctoral year in 1992 at University of Toronto, I spent happily playing in Geoffrey Hinton's lab. Jeff is the granddaddy of deep learning, and I was literally working on what we now call deep learning models at the time. But there are also many other machine learning approaches. Deep learning is not the be all end all. Even Jeff Hinton himself has said on the record, I think we need to throw it all away and start from scratch. And it's a phase. So there's a lot of media hype that's fairly shallow about deep learning these days. Those of us who are really working in AI research have already moved on to, that's one of the tools in our toolkit. But like we're looking at deeper problems, like the issues that I've spoken about on modeling actually awareness, mindful AIs. You can't really have an AI that is just mindlessly doing deep learning. All that is glorified regression, and it's not aware of what it's doing. That's a very important distinction between human level intelligence and sort of instinctive, automatic, reflexive types of learning that other species also have.
Okay.
So I think when we look at music, you get the same dichotomies in music. So, for those of us who grew up playing musical instruments, by, I don't even remember not playing. My family tells me that I was picking out melodies when I was 2 years old on the little pianos, right? And so nobody had taught me to read music. Nobody had taught me technique. This was just something that you learn by this sort of associative pattern recognition. The same way kids learn language. Nobody says to a kid, "Hey, you're not allowed to speak until I've taught you the rules of grammar and how to read." And then once I've done that, then you're only allowed to say things that when you're reading from the page written by some poet. Um, you know, it's done automatically below the level of consciousness. As you're hearing someone speak, you're not saying, "Oh, hearing, that was a verb. Someone, that was the agent that was speaking." I mean, you're not doing that. It's all happening at the unconscious level. Um, and so it's very much the same thing with music, is that if you've learned music in this natural way, as opposed to the recent artificial way, um, then that teaches us a lot about how the mind works. But at the same time, once you've done that and you start creating and you start thinking, how would I compose a piece? Or if I'm a DJ, how would I like construct this track? Right. Um, Now you're applying the linguistic side. Now you're like really thinking the way that a poet would think. And so you've got all those different types of mental processes going on. And studying music helps us also to understand that about the nature of human intelligence.
Okay. And the way artificial intelligence is programmed today and the research it's done today goes also more into this direction?
I think it's going to increasingly. It is not very much out in the popular, awareness, popular press yet, but people who are deep in the forefront of AI research are thinking about these problems and are making proposals. Our lab is certainly integrating uh, uh, both the sorts of automatic unconscious, fast pattern recognition and associative types of processing with more mindful styles of consciously controlled understanding of what it is I'm doing.
And how can we imagine this? I mean, what does it mean consciously controlled, for example?
Well, so there psychologists for many decades now have been studying the differences between automatic mental processes and controlled or conscious mental processes. Danny Kahneman, who wrote the bestseller Thinking Fast and Slow, um, uh, calls it System One versus System Two, and so there's an enormous amount of empirical data on the characteristics of System One or automatic mental processing versus System Two or controlled conscious mental processing, where you're aware of what you're thinking. Like so. So the thing is that if you're able to introspect, if you're able to describe your thoughts, that is conscious, controlled reasoning. But something like the fact that you're not thinking, oh, hearing was a verb, right? That's not conscious. That's unconscious processing. Uh, or if I ask you, for example, like, do you know what the difference is between walking and running?
I think so. Well,
What's the
walking.
difference?
Well, I mean, the way you ask it, I wonder if I perhaps don't know, but walking is a slow type of movement compared to running, which is a fast type of movement.
Sure, I mean, that's true, but you also, like, you've probably seen some of these competitive speed walking
Yeah,
races, right?
yeah,
So they're walking very fast, right? And you can run slow, you can
yeah,
jog,
yeah,
right? So like there is actually a technical difference. Now, let me just make sure you do know how to walk, right?
yeah, yeah.
And you
Yeah,
do
I
know
do.
how to run, right? Yeah.
Yes,
um,
yes.
and yet you don't know what the difference is. The difference is that if you're running, both feet leave the ground at the same instant.
Mm.
Now, most of us know how to walk, most of us know how to run, and most of us have no idea that that is the difference. That is unconscious mental processing.
Okay,
But now that we've talked about this, now you have conscious knowledge of it.
okay. And does it mean there is a way to program artificial intelligence in the way that it becomes conscious about the processes?
Yes, yeah,
And
that
all,
is, yeah, that is exactly what needs to happen for AI to actually reach human level.
okay. Well, I mean, that I also believe, but do you believe it's possible? Because some
Sure.
people say it's not possible.
Well, I think people get confused about what it means, right? Because as soon as you drop in a word like consciousness, I mean, there are like nine different definitions of consciousness, right? And they all depend on assumptions, right? There's some small group of core axioms that you have to take on what you mean. Like, first of all, um, are we talking about uh, mind body dualism, right? So are we looking at issues of the soul, or which a lot of people fold into what they are casually thinking consciousness means. But in the sense that I'm talking about this, it is the consciousness that I'm speaking of is empirically measurable. Um, so we're not attempting to say things about uh, the metaphysical, the soul, but we're looking at things that you can actually read from brain scanners, from fMRI or EEG. Um, we're looking at speed issues, right? So there's a lot of experimental psychology, cognitive psychology that you can do with everything from eye tracking to just how fast people can process things, what kinds of mistakes they make, uh, right? And so there's a lot of empirical stuff that you can observe about unconscious versus conscious mental processes.
Okay, all right. And how do you see the connection between consciousness and intelligence? And maybe before you tell me that, could you tell me what your definition of intelligence is?
Well, so there are different approaches toward defining intelligence, and one of them in the style of Turing, of course, is more of a behavioral definition. So if it looks like a dog and it smells like a dog and it walks like a dog, it probably is a dog. um, So that's basically the style of definition Turing had in his famous Turing test. I think from a science point of view, that is a reasonable definition. If you can drop an AI into a new situation that it's never experienced, if it's had the same kinds of environmental upbringing as a human, and if it reacts the same way as a human, then you've produced a human level AI. And again, not ascribing any qualities of metaphysical qualities of having a soul to that definition. But that would have achieved human level AI. And beyond that, if it becomes more powerful in its learning capabilities or its reaction speed, then it starts becoming a super intelligence.
Okay. And in the context of creativity, do you see one there as well, a connection between intelligence, consciousness, and creativity?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think creativity is it is basic. So there are a couple of very common cliches that you hear as soon as people start talking about AI casually, which is that oh yeah, you know, these machines are getting incredible, but they'll never be able to have human qualities like creativity and emotion and
Exactly.
those sorts of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing is, I think that that's actually misleading. Uh, so when it comes to uh, when it comes to emotion, um, that is actually simpler, more primitive, and easier to model than truly human intelligent processes like language understanding. Anybody who's had a dog knows that emotion is very basic. You don't need human level intelligence to have emotion. Um, it's far easier to model that. It's just, people didn't start doing it until recently, but it's easy to do compared with a lot of other things. And as for creativity, it is pretty much impossible to have any kind of intelligence without creativity. You cannot have a learning system without creativity by definition. Okay, so like, what does it mean to learn? It doesn't mean to memorize. Memorization requires no creativity. That's true. But to actually be intelligently learning is not just to memorize like a database does. It's to have been exposed to a few examples, but then you leap to generalizations and you are making inferences in situations you've never encountered before. That, by definition, is a creative process. To be able to speak a sentence that in a new situation like we're doing now that we've never done before is requiring creativity. Um, these are fundamental building blocks of machine learning, and you cannot have intelligence without those creative building blocks. So I think you know it's a comforting myth for a lot of people that machines can't replace humans because we're uniquely creative and emotion and all of these things are cannot be replaced. It's a sentimental notion that doesn't have any scientific basis. And so I understand very much the human yearning for that, but I think we need to redirect that human yearning to with how do we with positivity, with you know the best of the human qualities for creating empathetic societies, deal with the fact that these new machines are already creative and are already very much, especially in social media, reflecting emotion. Those things are altering our societies in drastic ways if we look at the kinds of polarization that I was talking about at the outset. And the reason that so much of my work in the last several years has been directed in AI ethics and AI in society is because of the fact that AI powered social media and media and search engines are ripping apart our societies as an unintended consequence of the fact that they're actually amplifying all these natural human, uh, evolutionarily hardwired qualities that cause us to be biased to believe things that we probably shouldn't believe, and to react in ways that are irrational, because in the old days, your tribe would be, killed by another tribe if you didn't react that way. But in a modern era where weapons of mass destruction are being democratized, uh, so that like ordinary people can be carrying really, really dangerous weapons of mass destruction, it's no longer tenable. It's no longer survivable for society to be that way, right? And so we need to figure out how to redirect those sentiments about human emotions, about taking care of each other and love, and understand how in our new era, where society is heavily populated by AIs already today, how do we bring those qualities to bear in that mixed society of humans and AIs, rather than allowing fear and hatred and stronger emotions to be learned and propagated by the AIs?